the way the Confederates want to use states' rights is specifically subversive to the republics, which are a prerequisite to the qualifying of them being a state or federal government. The way that they're using it is the active subversions of every variation of any kind of restraining law upon the government for infinite diversities, such as the use of their secrets in order to obstruct justice, in order to get a false conviction, and protected by the federal government of these false convictions guarantees that it is an engagement of slave raids without due process, with the specific subversion of due process qualifies the activities as hate group activities exclusively without the service of law, which is functionally to say, I'm not sexist, being sexist is wrong, and being wrong is for women. And when you understand that these contexts are exponentially contradictory towards themselves as to be ridiculous to the point of hilarity, you can't really take them seriously. You can only get aggressively angry at what they actually intend to do with their utter incompetence. There is an active responsibility to anyone who does not hate their own children to subvert these types of insurrectionist activities through the active use of fraud, which one of their primary uses in their mechanism of wizard fraud is functions that subvert the spirit of law, creating a position where you have lots and lots of code that mean nothing and are infinitely distracting to the actual source of what they would have been propagated from. Everyone who says that you should do this thing and that thing and the other thing wouldn't actually have it, because the way that the powers are written are specifically designed to destroy their big promotional parties, at which point, if you oppose it in favor of a stable, competent version, then you'll be condemned on the basis of opposing the propaganda, which promotes the spirit of the thing communicating to have never occurred or never being possible to occur, as a cover for the evolution of the list of powers of our enemies using the government through these policies to systematically build false precedents. Now, there judicial activists that are in favor of the Confederacy going way back and trying to reverse all pro-liberty, pro-public verdicts qualifies the natural position where they actively support the policies which are subversive to the spirit of the law in their activism. They're not historic roots policy supporters. They only support Confederacy and its evolution through the FBI Nazi loyalists, qualifying the infinite development of the intelligence agencies' unwillingness to change a single policy, including the ingestion of the KKK from the Confederacy militia into the secrecy functions of the government, qualifying the infinite development of their terrorism activities under artificial justifications and definitions, certifying the change in appearance of the same thing, which is the protection and continuation of the original offense, which they only pretended to have stopped or opposed or been any kind of offended by, merely the fact that they were caught and subverted, qualifying their obligation to restart and take a different approach through public outrage, which was unequitably utilized originally, or they would not have been able to have re-engaged in the insurrection in their contingencies to failure. Their preparations and subversions against the Americans in the development of justifying the cementing of their hate group activities cannot be protected. You must uncensor and publish the activities, the equipment, the science, the mechanisms, the agents, and everything that they do, which they are actively needing to obstruct in order to subvert the rule of law in favor of their insurrectionist offenses. For the national security to work, we have to subvert the crimes. You have to get rid of the active development of anti-public functions for the hate group which has evolved. Now, the Druid system qualifies the act of leaders of the priesthood engaging in contest against each other through a pseudo, what do we call it? Democracy. Now, the pseudo-democracy for the Druids qualifies their activities of actively opposing each other in aggression, which, when there cannot be protection against who gets elected or who doesn't get elected, and they ultimately default into their aggression. And when they agree into their anger and their unwillingness to settle the affair, they qualify the engagement into the Druid Civil War, or the Wizard Civil War, or the Intelligence Civil War, qualifying the act of malicious espionage and the subversion of the competing organization and party, certifying the winner by the use of bloodshed at a higher degree for things the general public has no possibility of ever understanding based upon its secrecy and obstruction from the general public, which is an active public threat for what would appear to be a completely arbitrary series of justifications which do not certify any legal function of government in the United States, despite it being for the intelligence or national security of the Confederacy, which is just the establishment of a Druid religion and the development of that Druid religion into Revelation Satanism, qualifying an international suicide pact. Let's see if I can get this proper.
And states' rights became one of those, a kind of cultural nationalism. Explanation for the South was different. It ought to have the right to govern itself, and that they had fought for this right of self-government, and a desire to create a new kind of nationalism in the 20th century, which was furthered by the Spanish-American War in 1898, when actually two former Confederate generals, one of them the nephew of Robert E. Lee, became generals in the United States Army. It was furthered by World War I. It was furthered by such movies as Birth of a Nation in 1915, where a Southern director presenting a Southern point of view in this film nevertheless portrayed Lincoln as a hero and as the Civil War as the real birth of this new united Northern and Southern nation. So I think that that was the principal reason why through the last decade or so of the 19th century, and probably much of the first half of the 20th century, you get this kind of consensus among Northern and Southern historians that this was a noble moment in American history, and let's just forget about these issues that might continue to divide us today and look at the positive parts of that history.
And that's from Slavery or States' Rights, the Causes of the Civil War, which specifically is necessary for us to understand that it is a false cover for insurrection and not an activity of the service of law certified for the use of a state government. If it states rights in order to subvert the rule of law of the federal constitution and of the state constitution, then I suppose
convey the message that he was instructed to give. In other news, a constitutional right that is super okay to take away is the right to bear arms. Because as President Biden has taught us, it is not okay to take away any constitutional right under any circumstance when it comes to abortion. But before he said that, he said the Second Amendment and the Constitution are not absolute. Congressman Chip Roy points out that tyrants disarm the people they intend to oppress. Take a look.
Tyrants disarm the people they intend to oppress.
It's very important that we actively take steps in order to subvert all of their various cons, including the use of switching people between the states in order to be tried by foreign jurisdictions, in order to acquire an unfair jury system, in order to rig the predetermined answers through various frauds that are basically infinite diversity, especially when you start trading someone from one state to another state to another state to another state, from, like, let's go Oregon, Nevada, Texas, Florida, New York, California, Maine. It really doesn't matter how many times you do this. You can constantly use these types of surveillance equipment in order to switch those jurisdictions, in order to find the function of trying someone outside of their jurisdiction under different protocols, codes, and subversions for this specific mechanism of getting their false conviction, because it's only exclusively criminal slave raids. And just as a basic reference, let's see if I can get this down.
Okay. Well, you
It's
thought it
important to
couldn't
look
get
at this.
worse in Uvalde, and it just got a little worse. It gets worse every time you talk about this story, and the cops are doing their best to make everyone realize that they're criminals, because those cops are criminals. Again, there's very little difference. I grew up around cops. My grandpa was a cop. My dad's a cop. My older brothers are cops. Some of my best friends in Chicago are cops. I go to their weddings. They're half turning the screw away from criminals, if not criminals, right? And it doesn't make them bad people. I know. Well, Jim, you're saying they're criminals. I'm saying that they manipulate the law for themselves all the time. They'll lie under oath. They'll lie in a police report all the time. And they selectively choose to enforce laws or not all the time. So, and plus there's a culture of policing. There's a culture of police. There's the blue line. Just like gangs, you don't snitch. You know, gangs, they don't snitch. If you snitch, they kill you. Cops are the same way.
Oh yeah.
So that's that. So that's what I say. What you go, Jimmy, are there no good cops? Well, what I've been told by people who study policing in America, what I've been told by academics who study it, is that there's a police culture. And the culture is corrupt, meaning it hides criminals inside their ranks, who everyone knows are brutal criminals, which then makes you complicit. So you either go along with that culture or you leave. So there's only cop culture people who are cops, and if you're not a cop culture person, you get out. You don't make it through the academy, or they get rid of you, or they do you a serpico on you. So that's what I'm talking about. Does that make sense? Am I being clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
The most.
And that was, in case people didn't understand, that was Jimmy Dore from the Jimmy Dore Show on the Uvalde cops harass mother who saved her kid video. Look it up. It's a great video. Amazing source material. Great comedian. Amazing person representing what's going on in the news. And it's completely, totally accurate. He has a firm grasp on many of the important issues, including these fraudulent exchanges on states' rights, which qualify the use of that corrupt fraud in order to protect itself from the possibility of enforcing the law in favor of the Americans, specifically against the Confederacy, which as a parasite protects itself by the use of manipulation of the host nation and society in order to change its hormones and subversions and signals, qualifying its non-prosecution of the parasite until the parasite kills the host, replaces the host, and meanders on into another violent war raid of the next potential host by which to infect, destroy, and basically be international terrorists through, towards, and extortionary, specifically against whoever they've infected, with every propaganda push towards the malicious violation of any other outside distractionary target, which qualifies the lack of security. As long as there's a distraction, you can never truly solve a problem. Let's be clear. If you cannot name your enemy, you can never win. Know thyself and know thy enemy, and you will never lose a battle in your life.
I think the news can't get any crazier. Here we are today with, of course, the story of the decade. The story of course, Epstein and Maxwell, that for over 30 years we know that that's documented.
There's records showing that for over 30 years. Could have been a lot longer. Could have been other players before this. Could have been 50 years. Could have been from the very beginning of one particular intelligence agency. Who knows? But documented for over 30 years. Two monsters, Mr. Epstein and Mrs. Maxwell, ran an international trafficking and extortion operation, moving thousands of children to ruling elites so they could do whatever they wanted to them, and they did horrible things that we can't mention on this particular broadcast. A lot of the key players in this extortion racket have been eliminated, but there of course is still one key player, Ghislaine Maxwell, that is facing sentencing for her crimes for providing a service that, according to the U.S. government, didn't have any clients. So why was she found guilty if she was providing a service that there's no client list to? Well, of course, there's a client list. The DOJ has it. They haven't leaked it. They do leak a lot of public information to the media, but for some reason, they haven't leaked the information of very powerful politicians, corporate leaders, tech Silicon Valley heads, bankers, and billionaires that, of course, were able to get children and do whatever they wanted with them. Of course, a lot of these people were monsters. They acted in very satanic ways. Don't believe me? Do your own research. Do your own homework. But now Maxwell seems like she's the only public figure still in this game that, of course, still is a liability to the larger extortion operation that was happening. Ghislaine Maxwell was also sent to a jail that's known for its corruption. She has already, according to the records, filed more than 100 complaints over jail conditions, complaining about, quote, excessive body cavity searches, invasive shower surveillance, and she's also complaining about death threats that she is getting inside of the jail. As according to ABC News 7, Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyers are saying that a cellmate was offered money multiple times in...
States' rights is a fraud, and that's specifically a reference to the use of their fraudulent engagement so that they can manage the exponential compounding of the dark money and the black market, which launders all of the dark money through the various alternative corporations or shell companies or howbeit. Do understand that the Senate and many of the others have actively taken steps, legislatively, otherwise, I'm not specifically of the extent of all of the security precautions against being prosecuted for sexual offenses, but this is actively double agent functions. They do not engage in good faith. They do not actually conduct a real activity of morality, which they would hold against the public. Do as I say and not as I do, specifically on the basis of the function of their magic system status. If you can't afford the black market, it is a function of not paying for it. It's non-payment for services as the offense. And if you can afford it, you have to compulsorily choose some acquired taste on the crime market, in which case you have to purchase it in order to secure yourself and the rest of the community against prosecution, or else when everyone's compromised, if anyone violates it, then everyone turns on whoever violated it, discrediting them so that they could engage in the plausible deniability of subverting the rule of law as they aggressively go after whoever is making the crime syndicate vulnerable, which permanently protects as opposed to the function of validates everything that we could possibly want them to do, and thus the opposite is the natural conclusion through their fraud schemes. The source material for the last clip that I just did was We Are Change. The video was Bombshell. They tried to take her out already. Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. These insurgent terrorists are monsters, and they are the most extreme threat to the public that anyone could imagine. America's enemies never stop coming up with new and ingenious ways of destroying the United States public, and neither do we. is the functional stance of the Confederacy, because they are not Americans. They are a different nation, and they will spare no expense in order to destroy American interests.